So old Gene dials up Guenther, right? He says, look, man, you're not cutting it. You're out. I got this man, Ayao. He's the man. We're going all the way. Jeez.
Now entering the grid. Here are your hosts, Thomas and Jeremiah.
Welcome back to another episode of Turn One Podcast. We're your hosts, Jeremiah
and Thomas.
And today, we're talking about the release of Guenther Steiner as team principal for Haas.
Yeah, we've done episodes before on some teams. We've done some team history like McLaren, and we have the plans to do a full-on in-depth dive into every constructor that there is because they all have a unique history, right?
Yeah.
We did not plan to do a look at Haas this early on, mainly because their history is really the shortest on the grid.
2016.
You have teams like Stake now, but they have the history of Sauber backing them, right? And so it's not apples to apples. But when you look at Haas, we had the big news drop earlier today, kind of this morning U.S. time where we are, that Guenther's out.
And it's not necessarily that he got canned. He didn't get fired, so you can't really say that because you'll tarnish the name a little bit. What happened was his contract ran out, and they just chose not to renew him.
Which is a nice way of being fired.
Pretty much.
Just not getting renewed. And so that news came out, and we're going to give our perspectives throughout this episode, and I'm not going to hold back. I think Haas has had some pretty major missteps. But what we're going to cover is we're going to look back at their short history, right, 2016. We're going to look at what they did right and what they did wrong in getting to where they are now, and then try to examine some of the steps they can take in the future to make it right. Guenther, let's start with him just a little bit. Personality-wise, a 10.
100%.
He probably a big reason a lot of people stuck with Drive to Survive was just for Guenther clips.
The cover of the F1 Manager video game, Christian Horner, Toto Wolff, Guenther Steiner.
Because he's marketable. But outside of maybe one half decent year where they got, fifth in the standings?
Yeah.
He has not put together a cohesive unit at Haas from a strategical standpoint, from a race engineering standpoint, and from a marketing standpoint, which a team principal is over all of that. You have your ownership group, you have your people run different things, but the team principal oversees everything. And it's never come together at Haas.
No, it's one of those things where you feel bad because, for one, he's arguably one of the faces of Formula One.
Absolutely.
So when you're looking at who should be one of the more marketable teams, you would think Haas, especially the fact that they are the only American team, which means that technically they should have the backing of, all of America.
That's their first big misstep. So let's start there before we dive into some of their history. So they come into the sport in 2016. They're backed by Gene Haas and Haas Automation.
Right.
Haas in the U.S., if you are a U.S. motorsports fan, you already know the Haas name from NASCAR and literally every other racing series with Stewart Haas Racing. Gene Haas is in everything. And the guy's got the money to back it up. Money isn't necessarily Haas's issue. Now, they're always trying to get sponsors and all that. But if they wanted to be one of the most funded teams on the grid outside of Ferrari and Red Bull, they could probably do it. He would just have to pump more money into it. But he hasn't seen the results that he's looking for. So they establish a plant in Kannapolis, North Carolina. Where else do they have facilities, though?
They have two other facilities in Europe. One of them is kind of like a halfway facility, I guess you could say, as it's in Maranello, and it's halfway between like Haas and Ferrari, which they use their wind tunnels, and that's fine. I mean, they also are a huge partner with them to where they use a bunch of their parts, but also in return, Ferrari gets a kind of a B team per se, kind of like an AlphaTauri situation where they can test some of their drivers before they make the jump. So in terms of that, why does a team have three facilities?
Well,
it doesn't make sense to me.
To the U.S. angle, so they have the Kannapolis, North Carolina location, but most of their race ops is done out of their Banbury, England location because they can turn around the car quicker in between the races because majority of the Formula One season is still over on that side of the world, even though we're adding some over here. So they can't have the cars coming back to the U.S. between every race, so they establish a facility in England, and then they do this partnership with Ferrari, and so they're just removing themselves from the U.S. side of things. They're not like, we're the America's team. I get it, but whatever. But flashback to like the first or second season of Drive to Survive when Guenther was going to all corners of the world seemingly to get sponsors. I don't remember him doing a single U.S. spot. It was all German, Russian, European, British advertising. Why are they not leveraging the U.S. market and just saying we're America's team?
It's odd, especially when you look at NASCAR. I mean, Pennzoil, and they got all these different brands that are of America. Like you got Penske, that's another one that's huge in NASCAR. But you don't see any of that whatsoever as a sponsorship in Formula One. That could be their in right there. Haas Racing. You don't see Penske on another car. You don't see Motorola.
Yeah.
Yeah. You don't see that anywhere in Formula One. Those are easily places where they could be kind of squeezing into that European market and getting their name out on a more broad horizon. But instead, they don't. Instead, they turn the car into a Russian flag. But that's later on. We'll get into that.
Well, and so looking at the sponsors, when you think about teams, you think about teams in terms of their sponsors, Ferrari, Red Bull, Mercedes. But think about the country that comes to mind when you think about those. Ferrari, immediately Italy, the Tifosi, the Italian flag. Yeah. It's ingrained in Ferrari.
Yes.
When you think about Red Bull, while the team is based out of England, they have clung to Austria so much because that's where Red Bull is based, that's their home race is the Red Bull Ring in Austria. And when they go there, it's a crazy Red Bull crowd. Like that's just the kind of brand. So Alpine, French
drivers,
and they
French
own
team
it.
principal, French team,
and the main team, the previous name was Renault, who's still obviously the engine provider for the team. They're a French car manufacturer. Mm-hmm. They have supplanted themselves as the French national F1 team. In the U.S., while we have 3 races now, we can't have Haas just come out and say we're America's team.
It's weird because when you look at Red Bull, they're almost more of America's team than all the other ones just because they do all of the stuff in America. When they released the car livery for what it was going to be for this year in 2023, they did it in America.
Yep.
Any kind of, they were the first people to do a demonstration in Las Vegas whenever the whole decision to bring a track there was made. So, I mean, it's like and if you think about Red Bull, it's huge in America. I mean, not even just in Formula One. Like, they had a guy drop from, space and did a dive. Like, that was crazy. But, like, in terms of crazy sports, Red Bull owns that market, and America gravitates a lot towards that. So when you're really comparing what team is the American team, it's almost sad to say that it's more Red Bull than it is the American branded team of Haas.
It's every other team but Haas. And then, okay, you want to move into drivers for a minute?
Yeah.
Okay. You can give the breakdown of who their drivers have been, but I want to start with this year we have an American enter the grid, and I don't even remember hearing Haas make a play for Logan Sargent.
No.
Or any F2, F3 American driver. What's the deal?
I don't know. It's when they first started, for starters, there's not a lot of American drivers.
There's not.
So you have to start with that, especially considering the fact that Logan Sargent technically didn't deserve the Formula One spot.
Open an academy here.
That's a good idea.
Have the Haas F1 Racing Academy be out of North Carolina.
Yeah, that's actually a really good idea.
Sign me up. I'll take over Ayo's spot right now.
Instead of the North Carolina facility just being for marketing purposes, maybe make it like a driver academy where you can actually take them out there. You teach them everything that they need to know and prepare them for the Formula One
Sign a couple
scene.
of Formula Feeder Series guys to be Haas drivers. You can do it on the cheap. I mean, seriously. Sponsor them, slap Haas on their car, and have the driving academy.
That's an idea, Haas.
Don't poach from Ferrari's academy of all Euro drivers.
Which the reason they only do that is because they share all their parts with them, and I understand that. They're kind of in a contract with that.
Remind me after drivers to get into the money specifics of their downfall. But drivers-wise, they haven't had that many drivers.
No, so for starters, they had Roman Grosjean and Esteban Gutierrez. That was their come-out season in 2016. They finished 8th in the standings. Fair. They're a new team. They got to figure out the
That's
car.
Not bad, actually.
Not bad.
You're not last.
Not bad. For a first-year team, not bad. Especially considering the fact that they had like no previous history whatsoever.
Right.
It's just like Haas. Versus Alpine, it's like, Alpine was Renault, and Renault was Lotus, and then Lotus was Renault again.
I think they bought some stuff from
Marussia.
Yeah.
Marussia,
but it wasn't.
the team was.
It's not like some of the takeovers that we've seen recently.
Right. So Roman Grosjean, Esteban Gutierrez. That doesn't work out on the Esteban Gutierrez side, so they take Kevin Magnussen. So now you've got the pairing of Roman Grosjean and Kevin Magnussen. First year together as a team, they're 8th. So not much progress made, but they're still not last, and they didn't go down, so it's still not bad.
Right.
And then you're looking at the very next season, same driver lineup, 2018, they come in 5th. Wow. Third year as a team on the grid, you come in fifth. And if you're looking at some of the finishes, they're crazy. I mean, you had Roman Grosjean coming in fourth. Kevin Magnussen was regularly in the top 10. I mean, they had a good car, a good team.
And that was the year Drive to Survive started, and the hype train behind Haas was real. It really was.
Right. So exactly that, because they were coming off of that fifth place finish. So they were like, because he said, even if you remember listening to Guenther Steiner in the interviews, he was like, we're trying to make a play right now. We're middle of the pack. We're trying to make a play for
they want to be top three
teams. Yes, exactly. Leading into the very next season, 2019, same driver lineup of Roman Grosjean and Kevin Magnussen. They come in ninth. You got to attribute that to the car, right?
There were so many
reliability It's the same
issues.
drivers. The car wasn't functional whatsoever, and immediately you lose 4 places on the grid. Ouch.
Yeah.
That hurts. Follow that up with the next year, exact same drivers. We're at 2020. Now, granted, I believe this was the COVID year.
Yeah.
So there was way less races than normal. I think there was only 17. Regardless, they come in ninth. Not the best finish again. Now you're still one down from the very worst team on the grid. Which brings me to the very next year, where they decide to completely change it up. They need a new mix-up at Haas. They take out both drivers. You're gone. We're going to mix it up. We're going to bring in 2 new drivers.
They're going to do a rebuild.
So the reason why they did this, actually, after doing a little bit more research, they needed to cut cost. So there was talks about Gene Haas shutting down the team in 2020 because of that COVID year. And so Guenther Steiner comes back and goes, hold on, I can make this work. They get rid of both of their drivers, which 2 experienced drivers, you got to assume that they're getting paid quite a bit. So they're cutting down essentially what would be, in my opinion, their probably 2 biggest cost. I could be wrong on that.
Couple million probably.
Well, because everything else has to go to the car. You can't cut any cost there. So they bring in 2 rookies. Mick Schumacher, son of the legend, and Nikita Mazepin, son of a billionaire.
A German and a Russian with ties to money.
Right, and the whole reason for the hire of Nikita Mazepin was that tie to money. They wanted to get, what was it, Eurocali. They wanted to get that huge Eurocali sponsorship, which you saw plastered all over the car, along with the Russian flag.
Well, as Gene put it, or as Guenther put it, it's just red, white, and blue. Could be America, could be France, could be Russia. So it was clearly Russian.
Which is just a cover up. I mean, come on.
And so here's my problem with that. So you're going to do a rebuild, right? They didn't commit to the rebuild. They went after those guys for their sponsor. They went after Mick for his sponsorship abilities, not his driver abilities. Maybe potential driver abilities.
He also won an F2 championship.
Maybe potential driver. But remember, even in Drive to Survive, in every interview, it was about putting him on billboards and whatnot.
I understand. Son of a legend.
And they bring in they bring in Nikita definitely for the sponsorship money.
100%.
Because he was horrible. So they didn't commit to the bit fully of rebuilding. If you're going to rebuild, you need to have the money thing figured out separately than the driver thing.
As talent.
Yes. You need to have the money backing the upcoming talent that you bring in, not a mix of both.
Right.
They didn't go out and get, I mean, Mick, again, yeah, maybe Mick was cream of the crop, but they didn't go get a driver to pair with him. And they definitely didn't give Mick the resources and facilities necessary to be successful, because he didn't improve his entire season. If anything, he got worse throughout his season with Haas.
Well, another reason for that is the fact that they had a terrible car that year.
Horrible.
They couldn't compete with anybody. Even if, like, for example, Logan Sargent, though he was following at the back of the grid pretty much all season, we saw what that Williams was capable with Alex Albon. So you would still see Logan Sargent not necessarily getting 20th. You would see him in 17th. You'd see him in 16th, 15th. I mean,
you'd see Mick in a wall.
Yeah. They didn't have a car. They didn't have a car to support Mick Schumacher. So you have to see it as you have an F2 champion coming in. Okay, it's time for a Formula One car. It's my seat. It's my time. And you're given that as your car. Even if he was to go to another team, that whole year of quote-unquote experience is nothing, because that was not a Formula One car by any means.
No, and just to set the stage again, the reason that we're going into this is Guenther's out, right?
Right.
Everything we've discussed so far is a at least joint Guenther discussion with Gene, if not a full Guenther decision.
Well, you have to take Gene pretty much out of the conversation of the decision maker.
Right.
By every means, this was Guenther's team. This was Guenther's baby. This was his passion project. And for Gene, this was just another attempt to bring out his name and get more money coming into his company.
And get into, I mean, arguably the biggest racing, I mean, maybe not even arguably, the biggest racing spectacle in the world right now. It's not NASCAR, it's Formula One.
So with that being said, they bring in the rookies. They do the rebranding. They throw out Eurocali all over it. The Russian flag gets on the grid. 10th place. No car, no talent, no money.
No, and millions in damages from Mick. I mean, that was like he caused more damage than any other driver has in a season to a car.
And then, of course, Nikita Mazepin was so bad that they actually gave him the nickname Nikita Mazespin, which is, ugh. If you're an F1 driver, you don't want anybody making a play at your name in that way.
No, and so they leave 2021 in their 10th place, and they're going to roll with the same driver lineup in 2022.
That's the plan.
The plan, except Russia invaded the Ukraine, and they cut all ties with Nikita and their Russian sponsor Uralkali and went back. Funny how the car design wasn't Russian until that happened, and suddenly they had to go back to the white, red, and black Haas car.
Suddenly the color scheme changes. Oh my!
Now
God.
I'll give Guenther a little bit of credit. So he still had Mick, right? But they bring back in K-Mag. Okay, this is a wild card season. You had a curveball thrown your way you weren't ready for. You lost a driver. You lost a sponsor. Let's go get a known commodity to
somebody with a familiarity in the team already.
Somebody that will get you some points for the year, and then you can move on after that, right?
Sure.
They move up a little bit in the world.
Not bad finish. They come in 8th in the standings, which if you're coming off of a 10th place finish, 8th in the standings is great. Even though it's not great, but it's great for sponsorships. It's great for the owner who's feeding the company. It's great for, everything above. And this is the year where Mick Schumacher, we finally start to see him take a leap. And the leap is that he has a car that can now compete, and he goes out there and he moves up the grid. We see him now getting a familiarity with, okay, this is a Formula One car.
Yeah.
So now I can actually go out and I can compete for grid positions. That brings us into 2023. Mick Schumacher did not measure up to what they expected, and they decided to go for another rebrand. They changed it up completely.
This is my biggest headache with Haas.
So there was somebody that's been waiting in the wings for a while.
A long while.
Something like 6 years, maybe less than that. I could be wrong on that. Don't come for me.
No, that's like he left in like 2018 or 19.
They bring in Nico Hülkenberg to replace Mick Schumacher. So now you have the lineup of Nico Hülkenberg and Kevin Magnussen. We have mixed feelings about this, you and I. You, not the biggest fan. I liked it. I like the fact because Nico Hülkenberg has a lot of talent. He brings a lot of experience, and he's still hungry, as we see, because most drivers, when they lose their seat, they just go off to another racing series. He's been sitting there waiting in the wings, waiting for his next opportunity, and he finally gets it in Haas.
And he takes advantage of it. He had for a Haas car that stunk, didn't he outperform K-Mag?
Yes, and in qualifying, not regularly, but in terms of what we've been used to from Haas, we see him in the top 10 pretty frequently in qualifying.
Yeah.
Now, there were problems with the car.
Yeah.
They had horrible tire degradation, which means that now when you're not racing for that one lap in qualifying and now you're actually going a full stint of a race, we saw them pit on lap 4 almost every single race, and it was like clockwork. I mean, here comes lap 4, here comes lap 6. Oh, Haas is the first team to pit. Tires are done. Throw them on hards for the rest of the race. Come on, man. And so what does that yield? A 10th place finish in the grid in the championship.
Okay, let me go off for a second because retrospect, hindsight, whatever you want to call it, I maybe now see why he brought in Nico and K-Mag. But from the start of the season, I'll go back to before we knew Guenther was out. Me looking at K-Mag and Nico Hülkenberg is not exciting. It's not marketable. It's not fun. It's boring stability. It's nothing that's going to win you a championship. It's not going to get you in the top 5. It's not going to get you in the top 3. It's not bringing in any new fans, really. It is so messy of a rebuild, if you can call it that, from having the Mick and Nikita to going to K-Mag and Nico. I hated it from the beginning of the season, trashed it then. I'm trashing it now. That was a bad decision. Now, hindsight, maybe Guenther knew his clock was ticking at Haas. And he's like,
play it safe.
And he's like, I've got to get some points on the board and I got to get in fast. I'm going to go with the known commodities of K-Mag, who I know will get me a few points in a season. And I'm going to go get Nico, who I know has had a history of getting a few points in a season. I'm not going to risk 2 rookie drivers and then me see the door while the rookie drivers are here. So maybe that is why. But they still finished in 10th.
Again, I attribute this to the car, and the reason why is because if you go back to 2018, we see what Kevin Magnussen was able to do with that car. Regularly in the top 10, getting points, whether it's 1, 2, doesn't matter, regularly getting points. They did not have a car worth a dang. Now, it might have had good aerodynamics. It might have had, cornering speed was fine. In the straight line, they always talked about how the Haas had a great straight line speed.
Because there's a Ferrari engine in it.
Sure. Regardless, if you can't make your tires last, the softs especially to start a race, last longer than 6 laps, and then you're immediately thrown on the hards when everybody else is taking the stint of those softs to what? 12, 15, 20 laps, and then they're going to the mediums.
Max Verstappen 30.
All right, and then they go to the mediums, right? And then if they stay on the mediums for a while, then they go to another set of mediums. That's a good strategy. But when you have a car that can only get about 6, 7 laps,
you're so behind on that harder compound.
You have to go to the hard compound, and then from there, because you went to the hards early, you have to go to another set of hards. There's no place to fit in a set of mediums
because you can't go back to the softs, so you can't run long enough to finish a race.
Exactly. So now if you're going softs, hards, that's a horrible strategy for one of the front running teams.
Yeah.
Let alone a car that can keep up if it had good tires. I mean, not a good look.
So they're rolling into 24 with Hulk and K-Mag again, and I just have no excitement for Haas.
Especially whenever you take out, arguably, like we talked about, one of the faces of Formula One, which brings us to the whole point of this episode. Guenther Steiner's gone, and they're bringing in his replacement, Ayao Komatsu. So Ayao Komatsu was the team principal, or not team principal, sorry. He was the trackside engineering director for Haas, and he's been that since 2016, the conception of the team. So he's been there. He has the experience. So he's comfortable with everything. He knows how it works. But they're changing things up in how they kind of handle things. So with Guenther Steiner, like you talked about earlier, the team principal has to be involved in every single aspect of the thing. That's not necessarily going to be in the case this time with Ayao Komatsu. He's going to take more of performance, what's happening on the track, and stuff like that. And they're going to delegate the rest of that stuff to, I forgot who it was, which kind of stinks. But regardless, they're splitting up the roles of the team principal, which if you have to do that, that's a problem. But at least they're going to have more of a focus on performance now, which is what I've been wanting.
Maybe not a problem. Maybe if you look at him as more of a CEO type that's delegating out roles, but he still needs to have his hand in everything.
Sure.
And now I don't wish poor things on any team. I want them to all do well, right? Like it doesn't matter.
Makes the sport better.
Yeah, it makes the sport better. It doesn't matter. If we have more competition and more parity, it's better. And so for Ayo, I really want him to do well. My concerns maybe come up
I said Komatsu, by the way. That's so wrong. It's Komatsu.
Komatsu.
And I'm so sorry.
So with him, my only concern would be, well, twofold. And maybe he's addressed this, and that's why he got the gig. He's an engineering guy for a car that has never really stood out from an engineering perspective.
Sure. Yeah.
It's had a lot of reliability issues. It's not even that it was a bland, neutral, middle-of-the-pack car engineering-wise. It was bottom-of-the-pack engineering-wise. That's a concern. The other thing, we can talk about the money thing here for a second, but Haas came into the sport as a new model for ways for teams to enter Formula One on a budget, right? Because Gene didn't want to pump that much money into it without it being a known entity for what he was going to get out of it. So they partnered with Ferrari, and it was really the first time that this had been done on the level that they were doing. There's always been team partnerships and technical deals and all that, but Haas literally buys almost everything from Ferrari.
Pretty much, except for the chassis.
Except for the chassis. It. And so they have this technical partnership with Ferrari that's unlike any other, where Jeremiah mentioned earlier in Maranello, Italy, they have a facility that they share. It's a Ferrari facility, but Haas has, a partnership in it, whatever percentage they have. For Ayo, how much of the engineering is on him and how much is just on him working with Ferrari?
So to kind of dive into this a little bit more, he was the trackside engineering director, not necessarily working back at the factory.
Yeah.
Not necessarily. So that's what the technical director does.
There you go.
They got rid of the technical director too.
Okay.
So got rid of Guenther
sense.
Steiner, got rid of their technical director, brought in somebody new. So he's the one that's not necessarily going to be focused on building the car. That's what the technical director.
He was fixing the mess that the factory gave him.
Pretty much.
Okay, so that's a good sign then.
It is a good sign.
And I'm glad that they got rid of the technical director. The other thing with Haas, so I don't know how much you can get away from Ferrari. You got to buy your engine from somebody, so buy it from Ferrari.
Unless you can produce it yourself, like Red Bull did, which
that's a lot,
right?
Unless you're already an engine manufacturer like Mercedes or something.
Exactly.
Red Bull is able to do it because they're Red Bull.
There's no Haas engines.
No, so they've got to reestablish themselves. And I hate that we talked about 4 different seasons where we said they were rebranding, reestablishing, or rebuilding.
That's a problem.
In a 8-year span, you're rebuilding half the time, and none of those rebuilds took. They were always restarting and restarting.
There's always a problem.
When you do a rebuild, the problem is you got to commit to it, and you got to say, I'm going to stink for 3 years, but I'm going to build a program out of it. I'm going to make it the right way. And when you look at this, I would so want, okay, give Ayao this first year of having a stable driver lineup, whatever. Next year, scrap it all. If he's got a contract that has him having in that job for 3 or 4 years, tear it down to the nuts and bolts, whatever you want to do, and get 2 new drivers that are marketable and good. You don't need to rely on them for money, but they should be avenues to get you more money while also being mainly because they're good drivers, not because they have parents with money.
Right.
That's the difference. And then rebrand as America's team. Really supplant yourself. Go to American events. Put your name on American TV shows, movies, advertising, wherever you can fit the Haas F1 branding. Stick it there.
Put some stars and stripes on the car.
Something. I mean, really just tear this down and redo it and rebrand it, remarket it. Get your drivers. You don't have to have an American driver, but have the drivers be very present in America. Have them going to a lot of American events. Have them be very, very outspoken about connections to America. And again, I'm not saying that America needs a team necessarily, but the fact that you're the only team operating in the U.S. really gives you a leg up on the competition. Now, especially that there's 3 races here every year.
Yes.
It's
Las
a
Vegas,
huge
Miami,
opportunity.
and Austin. Come on.
So again, for Ayao, I hope that he figures out, get a technical director that really knows their stuff. Spend some money, try to go out and get one of the top guys at a team. And then slowly cut yourself away from Ferrari. Start building a team of people in a factory that can manufacture your own parts. I'm not saying you can be an engine manufacturer, but try to remove yourself from that Ferrari partnership. Because what does that mean if you're the little brother to the partner? You're never going to pass them.
No.
They're never going to give you the latest
keys to the
great.
kingdom?
They can't do it. Their 5th place finish, I think, is realistically about as high as they could get right now with that partnership.
And if they could even muster that would be great. We would see them competing with Alpine. That would be exciting.
Because even Ferrari, we're questioning their spot in the lineup next year with Red Bull, Mercedes, McLaren, maybe Aston Martin, Alpine getting an influx of cash. I don't know where Ferrari falls. It might be 2, might be 3. It could be 4 or 5 realistically. And so now if you're Haas and you're behind them, they're the ceiling.
Exactly.
So if their ceiling is 4, your ceiling's 5.
Now you can say that since they're not getting all of the car from Ferrari, that there is a chance that they could pass Ferrari. Like if we look at Aston Martin in the beginning of the season this past year in 2023, they were better than Mercedes. And if I'm not mistaken, Aston Martin's engines are Mercedes.
They are, but they do a lot more outside of Mercedes.
But there was talks of Mercedes starting to back Aston Martin more than their freaking works team.
That'd be great.
That's crazy.
But I mean, we see things like that, and if you're, like I said, if you're going to do the rebuild, do it right. Get the new team principal, what you got. Get a new technical director that is awesome. Like, don't get some cut rate technical director. Top tier. Spend the money. That's a guy that you want to spend the money on. And then slowly start removing ties with Ferrari if you can. I don't know what kind of contractual agreements they have, but make yourself a full-on functioning constructor in the U.S.
I want to kind of transition from this into the relationship between Gene Haas and Guenther Steiner.
Okay.
So the relationship started out strong. Obviously, this was Guenther Steiner's team. Yeah. This was Gene Haas's pockets, but this was Guenther Steiner's team.
I don't know, Gene. I just need more money. I don't know.
Right. So the way that this breakup kind of happened, if you want to call it that, Guenther Steiner and Gene Haas had two different philosophies here in the past 2 seasons. Guenther Steiner's idea was basically we need to take 3 good years where we're getting more funding, we can put more into the car, more development, and we can get more out of it. Gene Haas's ideas were basically, you're getting a lot of money, you have facilities, you should be able to make it work. I've seen it work with other teams in other motorsports. You have what you need to make it happen, and you're not making it happen. So it's one of those things where it's hard for me to pick a side on who I fall with, because it's kind of a mix of both, in my opinion. One, there's never a problem with pumping more money into it, and especially if that money is going to be going to working on the car. There's no problem with that whatsoever. However, he has been pumping money into this thing since 2016, and it went from here to up to the top, and then down, and then it's just stayed down. So I can understand Gene Haas's frustration. So maybe that money needed to come from somewhere else, but regardless, I think they just needed to change things up completely.
Well, and so real quick on that, I agree with the Gene statement, even if he's not pumping in as much money as some of the top constructors, which is really hard to do.
Ferrari, Mercedes.
Think about it. They had a team principal in place for 7-8 years. They had the most consistent driver lineup probably of any team on the grid. Yes. I mean, seriously. And they had a partnership with one of the top constructors in the sport, and you can't crack 8th place more than once? Something's off about that. Now, again, we're saying, okay, if Ferrari's the ceiling and Ferrari's second, third every year, whatever, you should have been regularly in the top 6 at least.
Competing with Alpine.
If you had been getting 5th, 6th every single year, competing with Alpine, now Aston, whoever, Guenther would still have his job. Consistency and stability was the thing Haas had going for them. They had the most consistent driver lineup on the grid for the past 8 seasons, right? Only churning through 3, 4, 5 guys. I mean, really, they haven't had that many drivers. You also had the same team principal in place for 8 years. You had the same engineering staff. You had everything was the same ownership group. Nothing changed like we see with other Formula One teams. And the fact that you also had one of the long-standing, probably the most complex engineering relationships with Ferrari, like more so than any other team has, and you couldn't regularly get your car into the top 6 even, says something about the struggles and challenges you face as a team principal.
It's weird because if you want to look at it at a different angle, so let's say you want to look at it at the angle of, oh, well, they're a sister team, they're not going to do as good. AlphaTauri's not regularly at the bottom. They're the sister team of Red Bull. And if you want to look at it, let's not even take that as the example. Let's say that it's, oh, well, we buy our engines and we get our parts from somewhere else. Okay, McLaren gets the same parts as Mercedes. Aston Martin gets the same parts as Mercedes. In fact, Red Bull got their parts from Renault.
They got their parts from Renault and beat the brakes off of Renault every single year.
Every year. They were constantly ahead of Renault, and they got their parts from Renault.
Yeah.
Well, maybe not even parts, but the engine.
Sure. And that does show kind of the limitations of the technical partnership. You can exceed your technical partner, but you've got to have the backing that Red Bull has, and we know Haas doesn't have that just yet.
And so I guess if you want to look at it at that stand, I guess the best possible outcome of this was, one, I guess the team principal, because he's in charge of all the decisions, and there haven't been decisions being made. But more importantly than that, in my opinion, getting rid of the technical director. If you're the man that's in charge of producing that car, and that's what you come up with every single year, you're consistently in the bottom 3, get rid of him.
You know who I would hire?
Who?
Give me Matteo Binotto.
Matteo Binotto, that would be a good hire because before he was the team principal at Ferrari, he was the man in charge of that car, which that car gave us the competitions between Charles Leclerc and Max Verstappen of 2022. We saw Ferrari as a competitor. Matteo Binotto would be crazy.
He has a really good engineering background. It was just his team principal role wasn't suiting. It didn't fit him that well.
And Haas gets their parts from Ferrari. He's got the familiarity with Ferrari already. That would work perfectly. You need to get Matteo Binotto.
What do you think about how they can try to keep their fans? Because Guenther was obviously an integral part of their fan base.
So that's going to be one of the biggest problems for me, is because Guenther Steiner, being one of the faces of F1, he was the draw for fans. Everybody loved him in Drive to Survive. Everybody loves his interviews that he gives after races and stuff like that. All of his famous scenes, all of his famous catchphrases.
He brought in a lot of non-race fans.
Yes.
Just there for Guenther.
Exactly. So if you're going to get rid of that, you have to be able to keep your fan base. The only way that I can see that happening is the American draw. You have to have that American, whether it's the livery, whether it's the sponsorships, whether it's a driver.
Try to get a driver.
Something like that. You got to keep it.
And we said it, I mean, Jeremiah said it earlier, there's not that many American drivers. Okay, fair enough. But really ingrain yourself or have your drivers, go to American events and all that. Try to get a driver that is marketable. Don't rely on their marketability for financial reasons, but try to get a driver that is, one, extremely talented and therefore uses that talent to market themselves and their team. And the example I'll give is Lando Norris.
He's got a great personality.
He's literally everywhere. He's up there in terms of good drivers. He's got a lot of talent behind him, but he has made himself the face of McLaren racing, and he is McLaren racing.
And McLaren did that right. They really did.
He's on Twitch. He's on YouTube. He's streaming with Max. He's racing. I saw a video the other day where he was showing Max's simulator, and it was like the full wraparound screens and all that, and then he was showing his simulator next to it, and it was like the Logitech wheel and the pedals.
I remember a video where he's like, what is it called whenever the car is shaking a bunch?
Porpoising.
So he's sitting with one of his friends, and he's like, "Give me porpoising," and the guy just starts shaking the chair.
If they can sign somebody with that level of charisma or personality, you won't need to worry about the financials as much, because one, they'll prove themselves on track. Get somebody that's good. Don't worry about getting a Nikita that brings in money. Get a driver that's going to get you points, because that's going to get you more money than anything is points. And then have them go out and do events and do things that just makes them part of the American market.
Yes, absolutely. Before we close out, I want to touch on Ayo's career.
The new man of the hour.
Yeah, the man.
See ya, Guenther.
Gosh.
It's Ayo's turn.
So Ayo came as a race engineer at Renault, more specifically for Vitaly Petrov. That was 2011.
Okay.
So he spends that season with Vitaly Petrov, has a good season. 2012 moves to Roman Grosjean. That's where the relationship starts. He's Roman Grosjean's race engineer from 2012 to 2014. At that point, after multiple podiums, honestly fighting for race wins, not all the time, but every now and then, very rarely, but still fighting for race wins. He moves in 2015 to become the chief race engineer at Lotus. This is in that weird spot where is it Renault? Is it Lotus? Is it Lotus Renault? I mean, they went back and forth trying to figure out, who's going to be the sponsor. So after 2015, we have the conception of Haas. 2016, Haas needs drivers. They go and they pick up Roman Grosjean. And old Ayo, he's like, I'm rolling with that guy. That's the guy. So he goes over to Haas, and from 2016 to 2023, he's the trackside engineering director. Now, I don't know if maybe that's a lateral move and it's just like a different title, but he has the same role, or maybe if it was a slight demotion. I have no idea.
Right.
But he's not just one driver's race engineer. He's the director. So I'm sure he's in charge of multiple different facets and not just one specific thing.
And it's nice that we talked about earlier, he's not the factory guy either.
No, not at all.
Those are two different skill sets.
Exactly. So then he moves, finally, after 2016 to 2023, he's now the team principal at Haas.
A little bit weird that he's the team principal, right? Because the only analogy that I can think of is like American football, where if you fire the head coach or the general manager, everybody goes. Not that everybody is, everybody leaves with the coach because they're in solidarity. No, they're fired, all of them.
And it's tough because even if you take out that aspect where the whole team's gone, just focusing on the head coach. So in American sports, typically if you have 3 years where it's a dumpster fire, the head coach may be gone and you're cycling in a new guy.
Right.
They kept with Guenther Steiner for years.
I think well past what he should have been given his record. And I'll say he has built-in excuses. So in his 8 or so year run, he did get up to 5th place. So that buys you a little bit of time. He got to 5th place on year 3, which is probably about the end of a principal's run. You probably get a 3 or 4 year leash to figure things out.
He did a good job.
Got up to 5th. but then you get slapped with a 9th place finish, and you're like, okay, well, we had a bad car, okay, well, he got up to 5th. We'll give him another year. So then he signs, new drivers. They fall through. They have the COVID season. The COVID season was actually the year after they finished 9th. And you're like, okay, well, COVID's an excuse. Then he rebuilds. I'm getting Nikita and I'm getting Mick. That fails miserably. Like
2 rookie drivers.
He probably should have had a 3 or 4 year deal. When he got 9th that 4th year, that probably should have been it for Guenther. But the fact that he was so marketable, and the fact that he had the COVID year, and the fact that he was getting new young drivers, it bought him more and more time until we finally reached a point where it's like, dude, you've had enough time.
There's no more excuses.
There's no more time.
That and the fact that he was back and forth with Gene, like we talked about, where it's like, I have this idea. Well, I think that you have enough.
Are we now going to see on Drive to Survive, Ayao? I don't know, Gene. It's the same relationship between the two.
I just think we need more money.
Goodness. Okay, let us know in the comments. What do you think about the outing of Guenther Steiner at Haas? We want to know.
Guys, if you think Guenther Steiner is gone now, but he becomes the man in the Dutch Tourenwagen series, and he is the only guy that can take the team from the top, he's the #1 team principal, I think I agree with you. I'm right there with you. Let us know what your thoughts are down below.
If you can like and subscribe, we appreciate it. It goes to all the work that we're doing here, and we want to keep pumping out F1 content for y'all for a long time. We'll see you.
Bye, guys.